bring you in here because you're looking at dissent and really what the government is doing.
That's right, Brian. Yes, good afternoon all. Thanks very much for bearing with us. And the events of the last few weeks have certainly prompted the government and the police and the media to act in a very particular way. Some on certain sides of the debate or the argument might consider that this is a demonstration of the effect the state can have when it puts its mind to it. I think when one looks at detail, it looks like a sense of a complete loss of proportionality by police. The criminal justice system, on the one hand, can be seen to deliver an effect when called to, but is it the right effect? Is it appropriate? Or does it really look like it is the great big boot of authority stamping on dissenting voices? So we start with a tweet from the National Police Chiefs Council, NPCC, effectively showing off that they've arrested over 1,000 people and already charged over 500. So those prison spaces that we've talked about previously are now being vacated in order to move people in many cases on very, very tenuous and spurious grounds. But nonetheless, I've highlighted the text at the bottom of this, which says, "We told you justice would be swift and we wouldn't tolerate this type of criminality." Now, I think the two things that come out of there, first of all, are a rather menacing tone, which I think does not fit with the model that police really should be espousing to work towards, which is one of a cordial relationship with the public. Instead, it suggests a sort of bully boy mentality. And the other one, I think, to be drawn out of this is the specific reference to this type of criminality. And in effect, they're saying that, of course, they can, if they choose, deal with this or something else. But the inference being that there's plenty of stuff that they choose not to deal with. A constant gripe about policing and the political nature of it in this country. So we'll move on now to hear what Gavin Stevens, the chair of the NPC, said about this, talking about working hard to bring the disorder to an end. Arrests are just getting started, again, sort of slightly showing off, and they won't stop till communities get the justice they deserve. Well, that's a highly questionable statement, or indeed one that's very much open to interpretation. But the point he's trying to make here is he's linking violence and spreading of what he's calling online hate. And the NPCC has gone on to talk about regional crime units. If we just click on one, we see that they've got units set up specifically to deal with this. And the text in the next slide says that specialists have been tasked with pursuing online offenders and so-called influencers. Well, it's the media and the state that are calling them influencers and deciding that they are spreading hate and inciting violence. This is what I want to come on to. So next we'll look at the Serious Crime Act of 2007, which in effect amended the law with regard to incitement. There's a difference between inciting racial hatred, which of course is something that's cropped up a lot recently because that's covered by the Public Order Act 1986. Specifically here, we're talking about the Serious Crime Act, which defined two offences in sections 44 and 45. The first one being intentionally encouraging or assisting an offence. So and we need to consider what this is, and I'll explain why, because of how some people have in effect fallen foul of the law. But somebody commits this offence if they do an act capable of encouraging or assisting the commissioning of an offence, and also that the person intends to encourage or assist its commission. Very key phrase there, to intend that, and both things must happen for the offence to be complete. But then they go on to qualify it by saying that the offender is not to be taken to have intended to encourage or assist the commission of an offence merely because such encouragement or assistance was a foreseeable consequence. So that's section 44. The next slide is 45, which is slightly different in that the act is, again, capable of encouraging or assisting, but it's the belief that the offence will be committed and that the act will encourage the commission of such an offence. Now, related to this, we've had a couple of instances of people that are being referred to as certainly far right and online influencers and whatnot, one of whom was a woman in Cheshire, the other of whom is David Clues, who runs the Unity News network. And effectively, he has been what's called doxed. He's had several attacks from mainstream publications, which in a sense are, if they're taken on a reasonable basis and they do actually attack the point and not the man, fair enough. In this case, the specific references have been made to his family, which have had nothing to do with any of his online presence or his his news broadcasting, and yet they have been dragged into this. So this is effectively the level that we've got to. And I'll just go on to explain why this is a huge problem. But first of all, just to look at what he's been described as doing here is fanning flames. But we'll just go on and have a look at his Twitter, or the UNN Twitter, over the last few days. First of all, we see that he's simply reporting that there's a presence out in Southport as anger expresses itself over the murder of 3 young children. And then the next one says that the Southport riots is effectively comparing the way that violence was treated by police in 2 different situations. And then finally, he's talking about effectively state violence here with a picture of Keir Starmer and Zelensky, saying that extreme violence, murdering and maiming of people is okay as long as the government does it. Now, the issue with clues here is that these journalists can conduct this sort of activity with absolute impunity because of the gift that is the Online Safety Act 2023, which we look at in the next slide. And then we'll just go straight on to the provision in section 179, which states that a person commits an offence if they send a message and that it conveys information that the person knows to be false. Now, that is absolutely critical to this. Further, that the person intending is intended the message or the information in it to cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm to a likely audience. Well, this means, in effect, this takes some of the provisions from the Malicious Communications Act 1988 and the Communications Act 2003 and rolls them up into this offence. But the most significant detail comes next in section 180, which says, in part 1, a recognised news publisher cannot commit an offence under section 179. So even if the article that was printed in the Sunday Times, the Daily Record and the Guardian, all attacking David Clue. So don't mean to make the point about the individual, but the fact is that they can do this because even if they knew the information was not false, and with clues there was effectively a reference to sort of the suggestion of criminal activity, which was absolutely not borne out by the events of some years ago, but they not only have the intent of putting out false information, but to intend to cause harm. And yet there's no comeback because the Online Safety Act, which is exactly what we've been warning about for years, rules this out. So to look, if you want the background to all of this, I'd suggest that you go into the censored section on the UK Column website, which has a really in-depth analysis of the timeline for all of this. Now, concurrent with this, just updated yesterday, was the guidance on radicalisation and Prevent. We'll just have a look at the government website, updated 13th of August, how the Prevent programme supports people who are at risk of becoming involved with terrorism. So again, trying to capture everybody like within this, effectively within this sort of construct. And we'll just look quickly at the referral form itself. So I've asked concern or collaboration. I mean, there's a more than a whiff of 1930s Germany here, getting people to report on their family, friends and neighbours. But the referral itself, particularly in the next slide, has a number of phrases, talks about extremist groups or people that worry you, but of course doesn't qualify it. So essentially trying to push people into a situation of concern about others, travel plans to a conflict zone, and also the threatened anyone with violence, shown interest in hate crimes, extremists or terrorism, or use their mobile telephone, internet or social media in a way that worries you. Well, effectively, this is so absurdly subjective as to be almost meaningless. But the next slide will just go on to how effectively sort of ludicrous this has become in terms of putting the tail on the donkey. And we've got the Daily Mail here reporting that Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage being considered or scrutinised by the security services amid fears that Putin is actually behind all this. So what the next slide shows just a little bit of text from this, saying that questions remain unanswered over who's financially supporting Robinson. Well, this was something we dealt with on UK Column News a few weeks ago. The Israel lobby very, very clearly stating that they have funded Robinson in the past. So I don't know why there'd be any debate or confusion over that. But then some looking to Putin, arguing he benefits from domestic unrest in Britain. Worth pointing out, of course, that Nigel Farage has come out very much as taking a pro-Israel stance at the moment. And what we'll do now is we'll just have a look at the former Secret Intelligence Service MI6 operative Christopher Steele, who's speaking to a Times Radio journalist about his views on whether or not Russia has anything to do with this.
What happened in Southport? It caused such psychological, or was designed to cause such psychological damage, this attack, and it is obviously subject to a criminal investigation now, on children at a Taylor Swift dance party. Will they be looking, the security services, if you like, at one of those, at a jigsaw of what's been happening in this country, and will they be looking potentially for links between what happened in Southport as being something directly designed to be used almost as a sort of lifting point, a bouncing off point for the riots that we've seen in this country, as a way of whipping up tension and hostility on the streets of Britain?
Yeah, I mean, I think bear in mind that Britain is probably Ukraine's strongest ally and is really material in terms of Ukraine's ability to fight Russia in the east, particularly. And so, yes, they'll be looking at things like that. I think it would be far-fetched to think that an incident like Southport was manufactured by a foreign power. However, the foreign power might well be looking at trigger incidents in which they can exploit situations that occur spontaneously in order to create a bigger political effect. And I suspect that may have been happening here. One of the theories that has been going around is that Russia was indeed planning to destabilize the UK and look for excuses to do so, and that was planned for this summer prior to an expected October general election. And of course,
so there we go. Christopher Steele, in effect, doing exactly what David Clues and others have been pilloried for, and in some cases arrested for, which is to report on things that people are saying. Steele there talking about rumours effectively sort of on the wind. And yet he can do that. The Times Radio has no issue doing that. So it is very much a case of rules for thee, but not for me. Now, I'd just like to finish up by saying that if you want to know more about this, Christopher Steele in particular, who has been sort of scrutinised by UK Column over the years, there are two recent articles that I should draw attention to. First of all, on the Integrity Initiative, an article written by Mike Robinson back in 2018, and then Johnny Vedmore with a piece entitled Pablo Miller, The People Working Alongside the Real James Bond. So that's where this segment gets to, but in effect, an absolutely appallingly disproportionate response by the state. And of course, as Brian has said many times on the news in the last few weeks, an absolutely enormous and deliberate distraction from the underlying causes of the unrest in the first place.
Charles, thank you very much for that excellent summary. We're in troubled times, aren't we, with a government which is, it's got the veneer of respectability. It claims to be there as a Labour Party looking after the people, but everything it has done so far in this very short time in government is to close things down on the public, and particularly any of the public that dare to ask questions.